right, it's still the Money Show here on Arise News. Joining us now for a world brief and a review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Afenifere. Good morning. Great to have you here.
Great to be here. Good morning, Moses. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Ayo.
Always so cheerful in the morning. I love it.
You have to be. I'm definitely a morning person. Okay. You know, I joke a lot about the fact that around like 9 p.m. my battery starts to like dwindle, and then I'm asleep latest by 10 if I'm feeling foxy, to be honest. But I'm very much an early bird. Very much an early bird. I am.
It's the best of worlds.
Good morning to you all. Let's start with the world brief, and we start in the United States, where a 14-year-old Colt Gray is his name. He's accused of killing 4 people at his high school in Georgia. He was interviewed last year, though, by police about anonymous online threats, according to the FBI. Now, Gray denied to police back in May 2023 that he was behind those internet posts that contained images of guns, warnings of a school shooting too. Now, the suspect did open fire on Wednesday at Apalachee High School in the city of Winder, over in Georgia, killing 2 teachers and 2 pupils. 9 others were injured. He was arrested on campus, and it has been confirmed that he will be prosecuted as an adult. Now, if we move on and, of course, stay within the United States before I come to my great colleagues for their comments, we'll move on to some US politics now. And we know that with less than a week until the 10th of September presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, they will be meeting for their debate on ABC News, according to the network itself. They'll be meeting on Wednesday, and they have now released a set of rules that will govern this matchup. There'll be 90 minutes of debate time with 2 commercial breaks. The debate will be held in Philadelphia, as we know, at the National Constitution Center, and will have no audience in the room. Continuing on with the rules, microphones will be live only for the candidate whose turn it is to speak, and then will be muted when the time belongs to another candidate. Only the moderators will be permitted to ask questions, and a coin flip was held virtually on Tuesday to determine the podium placement and the order of closing statements. Former President Trump did win that coin toss, and he chose to select the order of statements, so he will be offering the last closing statement. There will be no opening statements, and as I said, those closing statements will be 2 minutes per candidate. Each candidate will be allotted 2 minutes to answer each question with a 2-minute rebuttal, and an additional minute for follow-up clarification or response. There will be no props, no pre-written notes, and each candidate will be given a pen, a pad of paper, and a bottle of water. And lastly, campaign staff may not interact with candidates during commercial breaks. So it's quite an exhaustive list of rules there. And then moving on to the Middle East, we're seeing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has again insisted that Israeli forces will not leave the Philadelphia corridor. It's a strategically important strip of land in southern Gaza along its border with Egypt. And he told foreign media in Jerusalem that though he's open to considering alternatives to the presence of Israeli troops there as part of any permanent ceasefire deal, he does not think it will happen. Essentially, he wants it asked, but he doesn't see him asking his troops to leave that area. Mr. Netanyahu also argued that Israeli troops must remain in this buffer zone to prevent weapons and possibly the remaining hostages being smuggled across the border. Hamas, however, have said in a statement that Mr. Netanyahu's decision not to withdraw from that corridor is another attempt to thwart the ceasefire agreement process, adding that it was time to put pressure on Israel. And lastly, in South Africa, a man who had been chief engineer at South Africa's state-owned passenger rail company has been sentenced to 15 years in prison for faking his qualifications. Daniel Umfinkulu, I hope I'm saying his last name correctly, was head of engineering at the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa for 5 years, earning an annual salary of about 2.8 million rand, which is approximately 156,000 US dollars. And on his CV, the 49-year-old is claimed to have had several mechanical engineering qualifications, including a degree from South Africa's respected Witwatersrand University, as well as a doctorate from a German university. However, the court in Johannesburg heard that he only completed his high school education. And despite admitting that he did not correct people who believed he had a PhD, the suspect is reportedly planning to appeal this 15-year sentence. Now, I mean, this is obviously serious news here, Vimbai. However, for 5 years, I mean, perhaps was there a little bit of competence there if he was able to fool them for 5 years? But I guess not. What do you think?
It reminds me of Suits.
Yes.
You know, the series.
He didn't actually go to Harvard, did he?
He didn't go to Harvard, but he was able to practice as a lawyer.
Yes.
But, you know, I think what this really does is it highlights the fact that although the conviction happened 2 years ago, South Africa is going through a renaissance moment with regards to trying to fight state capture, trying to fight corruption, trying to clamp down on fraud, the use of fraudulent documents. You know, of course, everybody's still talking about that big story about the now Miss Universe Nigeria, Chidima Adesina. And the reason why that was such a big story, take away the xenophobic element of it, was because it exposed the rot and how deep the rot is with regards to fraudulent documents circulating so freely and so acceptably around South Africa. So with regards to Daniel, you did a good, it was a good attempt.
Tell me.
With regards to him, you know, faking a job offer letter from Germany to boost his employment prospects, getting away with it for so long and being known as a superstar engineer. Brilliant guy, but it's so sad when such brilliant people use their IQ for, you know, for this, for, you know, for fraud and for so forth, because he clearly could have worked his way up to the top. But another conversation, you know, does competence get you to the top here on the African continent, you know? That's
a very interesting story. I guess he's 49-year-old. He's going to jail for 15. He'll be out when he's 64. Perhaps maybe it's a good time to pursue those education for real. Now moving on. And just have that career. He has enjoyed the benefits of education he claimed he had, which he never had. Now that he has enjoyed the hundreds of thousands of dollars in salaries and all that, I think we should sort of just go back to school after prison terms and his life is made. And his life is done, in a manner of speaking. 64. Yeah, just go back to school, have it all and lay back whatever is left of his life. But again, crime does not pay.
It doesn't.
In a very good society, the system finds you. The system punishes you. The system rewards those who are excellent and rewards those as well. Also punish those who cheat. Those are my things. But I think it's a very big story. The bigger one, actually, for me, was the school shooting.
Absolutely.
Heart-rending.
Yeah, the school shooting, heart-rending, and a number of questions there. So last year, the young man, who was 13 years old at the time, I think his name is Carl, had been interviewed by policemen where they traced some online hate messages to him. They interviewed him and interviewed his dad. Obviously, he's still a teenager, so they brought his dad into question. And they both denied it and said they didn't have any involvement in that. Now, because the police didn't have enough proof to further the investigations, it was closed. However, one thing we must point out is that the dad admitted to having firearms in his home, but he assured the police that his son didn't have unsupervised access to the arms. But a year later, and so you can see how crime develops, and this is why we speak a lot against online hate speech. It starts off as verbal abuse, and usually verbal abuse graduates to physical abuse, as we see in many instances. And this is what's happened. He was able to bide his time for 1 year, and then schools are just resuming in the United States of America. His school had resumed 1 month earlier, and then my next question is, how was he able to get a gun into school?
Interesting. When you look at the first one that really hits me was back in 1998, the Columbine High School shooting. Those two boys.
Yeah.
And we've been through this before, and we keep asking ourselves whether it's the FBI or the police. When you interview certain individuals, young ones, and try to find out how much do they know? Hate speech, practicing, guns at home, mom and dad, and what have you. And you begin to say, look, well, we interviewed him, we saw a few things, but we never thought he's going to get to this. And it keeps happening each and every time. So that's really concerning for me.
Yeah, America has a bit. I was just going to mention that there's no motive established yet. No. It would be great for future occurrences or to prevent future occurrences to really interview him and psychoanalyze him. Why did he have to take that? Why did he have to shoot? Right. He went to school normally and then he went outside, came back with a gun and shot wanted to shoot members of his class, but then that door was locked. So he went to the next class, killed 2 teachers, 2 students like himself. What do parents have to do in America to keep their children safe? Imagine the heartache for people who send their children to school. It is really sad. And America has gun issues, and I hope this can be investigated.
If we can say that there's any good news here, is that he was surrendered alive, and hopefully through questioning a bit more information can come out. But there is definitely an epidemic when it comes to school violence, gun violence, and the United States, Sandy Hook, all of that. So thank you for your comments. Let's move on now to newspaper headlines across the globe. And we begin in Nigeria with This Day newspaper. And This Day is reporting that pressure is mounting on the federal government to reverse this petrol hike. The PDP, labour unions, Afenifere, CSOs have all joined this chorus. You'll also know that organised labour have called this situation a betrayal, being that the controversial acceptance of that 70,000 naira minimum wage was based on there being no increases in fuel prices. However, if we move on to the New Telegraph, the New Telegraph is also leading with this fuel crisis, and they've quoted organised labour and the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who both insist that this new fuel price will bring severe hardships on Nigerians. But to that tune of Labour saying that they've been betrayed by the federal government, the senior special assistant to the president on print media, Abdulaziz, says President Tinubu never made any offer to the minimum wage pegged to any type of price of fuel. So there's definitely going to be some back and forth there because Labour insists that there was one. If we now move on to The Punch now. The Punch, in addition to leading on these petrol scarcity issues, Punch's front page also features a quote from Bill Gates, who's currently in Nigeria, who says that the Nigerian economy has stagnated and says Nigeria's debt has surpassed 50% of its own GDP. Now, he made these comments against the backdrop of the $2.8 billion investment in Nigeria from the Gates Foundation, which is its biggest commitment on the African continent. So it's within the purview of those investments, I believe, he's making these comments about the Nigerian economy. If we move on now to The Guardian is reporting on the federal government increasing the prisoners' feeding allowance budget to 45 billion naira. That translates into a 50% increase in the daily feeding allowance of an inmate from 750 naira to 1,500 naira per day. You'll remember a viral video alleging poor food conditions at the African Correctional Centre in Calabar, and perhaps that could be a reason that have triggered this move for an increase in the feeding allowance of prisoners in Nigeria. And then if we move on to the Vanguard is taking a look at news coming out of China. We do know that our president, along with many African leaders, continue to be in China for this summit. And Nigeria and China have agreed to carry out international cooperation when it comes to financial intelligence on anti-monetary laundering. And AML is anti-money laundering, isn't it? Yes. And countering the financing of terrorism. And they also are extending their support to Nigeria's efforts to safeguard the order of its financial and foreign exchange markets, and also to crack down on financial crimes, including money laundering. Lastly, the Daily Trust is staying with business and financial news, and it features a report that says bank loans to the private sector. This is up your alley, Bosun. That bank loans in the private sector have hit 2.3 trillion naira in 1 month between June and July. And it's a move that the article says reflects the continued support for Nigeria's economic growth, especially since this extra line of credit is coming off the back of an unstable naira and a naira that is struggling against a basket of currencies. If we move on now to our African papers, the Daily Nation of Kenya is leading with Raila retires. The Orange Party is planning for Odinga's exit, says this article, and they believe that that exit will come as early as next month. As we know, for nearly 20 years, the former Prime Minister has led the Orange Party, but the party's chairman says that he'll soon call it quits as he eyes the African Union Commission chairperson seat. And then moving on to Ghana, its front page looks at former chairman of the National Development Planning Commission, Professor Stephen Adey, who is calling on President Nana Akufo-Addo to declare a national emergency on illegal mining. And then lastly, a vast majority of the UK's front pages are looking at the release of this eagerly anticipated Grenfell inquiry, which finds that all 72 deaths that occurred when that block of flats went up in flames 7 years ago were avoidable. Off the back of that, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has apologised and says that police in the UK are now under pressure to accelerate a criminal investigation.
Right, there's so much
Whole of a lot
to
there,
unpack
isn't it?
there. Yes, there is. Very quickly, I'll start with Bill Gates' comment on Nigeria's economy having stagnated. Well, Economics 101 says that if your inflation is high, you increase interest rates, your intention is ultimately to stagnate your economy so that inflation can come down. Yes, he broke down some other elements. However, I just felt like, well, this is sort of stating the obvious. To Kenya, very quickly.
Yes.
This is something for all opposition leaders, especially those who repeatedly attempt for, run for the presidency. I'm glad that Raila Odinga has finally seen the light and realized that it's not about being a serial presidential candidate. He's, off to the AU, and I think there's potentially off to the African Union if his bid goes well. But he's still also making hay while the sun shines. He's currently in China with William Ruto at FOCAC. But again, African opposition leaders, it's okay to retire and move on and pursue other interests.
Very interesting. I'm interested in the business side of things. But of course, $50 billion fresh money over the next 3 years was what President Xi Jinping promised yesterday evening at a dinner with the 50 African leaders, including the African Union. This is $50 billion over the next 3 years, but don't just think Beijing is going to open its purse and just give the money to everybody on the continent. You've got to have projects and whatever that will make good money on investment and trade. So it's not just free lunch. It's a $50 billion continents or countries within the continent that do what is well, policy actions, matching words with actions and vice versa, will have to be, who will benefit from that money. But we've got some resilience numbers coming out of Nigeria. If you look at the latest central bank PMI data, showing we have an expansion in manufacturing economic activities last month, 50.2. The Stanbic IBTC data that came a few days before yesterday also confirmed that. And that shows that after 13 months, the economy was starting to grow a little bit, expand. That shows resilience of Nigeria despite the very tough environment we have at the moment,
All right, so NEC, they had the NEC meeting yesterday, presided by the Vice President, Kashim Shettima, and the conversation on state police came up again, and the reports, we had that report in many of the newspapers this morning, and it's great to see that that conversation hasn't been swept under the carpet. Remember in February, the President had talked about having consulted with state governors. He wanted to revisit, perhaps bringing back, the conversation on state police. Now, 4 states out of 36, including the FCT, have not yet submitted a report. So each of the states are supposed to submit a report which the president will consider and then help to shape his policy with regards to state police. And the states haven't done that. Part of, I think, Sokoto, Kebbi, and a few other states haven't done that. So they have until Monday to submit. And let us begin that conversation. We're talking about security and being able to give that power, to make it more local and, subnational, at subnational level. So that's a great conversation to have. Very quickly as well is flooding. Bauchi State, in fact, said that as a result of the flooding experience, northeastern states were worst hit by floods in recent times, and that it would impact on food output. Yes. I say this because we've talked about food insecurity, and so just to say that now we have a deeper issue around flooding, which might even further exacerbate the issue. So just to mention, about 3 billion naira has been given to each state, so hold your states to account, especially if they receive the 3 billion naira to see what they've done with it. Exactly. Thank you so much, Afenifere, for bringing us World Brief and, of course, newspaper review.